It seems like every day you just have to turn on the TV to see terrorist attacks, violence, and war committed in the name of Islam. With 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, and with mass globalization forcefully merging East and West, the clash of civilizations and values has amplified, particularly on the issue of Islam. Now, there are Islamists who wish to see Islam conquer the world at the end of a sword, and there are white supremacists who wouldn't mind just nuking the Middle East and banning anyone with brown skin from crossing our borders. But for the level-headed moderates in the middle, the spectrum of this discourse ranges between three predominant approaches. To the first group, I would like to attribute the moniker the Ostrich Camp. This includes the Reza Aslans of the world, who would bury their head in the sand, claim that there is no problem, Islam is just a religion of peace, and you should look the other way. Next are the reformers of Islam, people like Majid Nawaz, who admit that there is indeed a problem. They fight for gay rights and equality for women, but claim that the problem is with our interpretation of Islam, while admitting that the religion of Islam must be reformed by reinterpreting it. Lastly, there's the ex-Muslim movement, a large and growing body of ex-Muslims who claim that the problem is with Islam itself, that while Muslims can be reformed, the religion itself cannot and should be abandoned altogether. My guest today falls in this last category. He's an Iranian ex-Muslim and founder of the Atheist Republic, the largest atheist group on Facebook in the world, with consulates connecting atheists around the globe. He is the author of the book Why There Is No God, and he co-hosts the Secular Jihadists of the Middle East podcast, along with 3 other ex-Muslims. I highly recommend that you check out his work, and I hope that you enjoy this interview. Without any further ado, I give you Armin Navabi. Today I wanted to talk with you about the reform movement of Islam. Do you think that the religion of Islam can be reformed?
Well, okay, so when we talk about reforming Islam, people have to understand that in the modern time and in the West, this has a completely different meaning from what it used to mean historically. The so-called quote-unquote reformers of Islam never saw themselves as reformers. They never thought that you could improve the word of God. God's message is perfect. Other people might have referred to them as reformers. What they saw themselves was as people that are taking Islam back to the original. So it wasn't the reform, it was basically going to what actually God and Muhammad intended it to be.
And do you think that the Quran is a peaceful book?
Well, no, obviously not. If anybody has read it, they could clearly see that it's not. But the thing with the books like the Quran and the Bible, more with the Bible than the Quran, is that they're vague enough to be able to make it mean whatever the hell you want it to mean. Even if the Quran wasn't obviously so violent and so political, it's still a problem if you could make it mean whatever you want it to mean and you put it in such a high authority that you have to follow it, then different people could use it for whatever they want. And then the people that use it to get good messages out of it, they think they're doing good, but what they're doing is that they're giving authority and legitimacy to a book that could be also used for evil. If you want to do good, just use your own moral compass and just do good. You don't need this book to do those good things, right? So why are you giving authority to a book that is also used for doing evil things?
What would you say to someone who would look at Islam and they would say, well, Christianity was just as violent 500 years ago. You know, it's gone through stages and steps to make it a more peaceful religion. It's resulted in, a lot of charity. People would do that with Islam as well and say, well, look at this group that, provides charity to people in need in the name of Islam. Why can't groups like ISIS become a thing of the past but still have the beneficial sides of religion? What would you say to that?
Christianity was never reformed. It was Christians that are reformed. And Christians got reformed not because the Bible changed, it's because people started ignoring the Bible. I'm not going to give credit to Christianity for Christians doing good things, so that's why I'm not going to give credit to Islam for Muslims doing good things. If you look at what happened to Christians, it wasn't because of the Luther's Reformation that Christians are taking Christianity less seriously. It was because of the secularists and secular activists and the Age of Enlightenment and, the Industrial Revolution that people took other things more seriously than Christianity, and other ideas, other philosophies, other better philosophies had a huge competition with Christian values, and Christian values lost. It had nothing to do with Luther and his Reformation. In fact, if you look at what Luther was trying to do, he was trying to make people be more true to Christianity, be more true to the Bible, take the Bible more seriously, not less. What we're happy to see with the trend in Christianity is that people are ignoring it, not taking it more seriously. And that has nothing to do with Christianity itself. It has to do with people like us, secular activists, that competed with those ideologies. So I'm not saying that Muslims cannot be reformed. I'm saying Islam cannot be reformed. Muslims definitely can be reformed. And Muslims right now, there are many Muslims that fight for gay rights, fight for free speech, fight against sexism, fight for democracy. But what I'm saying is that I give credit to those Muslims for fighting for these things. I'm not going to give credit for Islam for doing those things. If you understand Islam, if you read the Quran, this is an ideology that always has stood in our way for fighting for these rights, for fighting for equality, for fighting for free speech. Islam has always been a stumbling block in our way. If I do give credit to that ideology, it's going to turn back and be used against us. I'm not going to give it more authority and legitimacy that it deserves. When somebody like Majid Nawaz goes and fights for these things, which I support, which we need people like Majid Nawaz to go and fight for free speech because it benefits us all, what I do is I give credit to Majid Nawaz. I don't give credit to Islam. That's why I'm saying that I'm all for reforming Muslims, but I would never give credit to Islam and call it reforming Islam.
How do you feel when people refer to Enlightenment values as Western values? I don't necessarily see them as geographically limited.
No, human rights is not geographical.
Or when people say, oh, that's just part of their culture, and they're clearly referring to the treatment of women in Islam, the treatment of gays in Muslim countries.
Well, that's fucking bullshit. It's part of their culture to throw acids in people's faces as well. Like, is that part of a culture? Human rights is global. Human rights should be global. All people deserve the right to free speech. All people everywhere deserve to equality. Women everywhere deserve to be equal to men. Gay people everywhere deserve the same rights as straight people and the same opportunities for happiness. These are things that it doesn't matter if you're in the United States or in Afghanistan, you have the same capacity for suffering and you have the same capacity for being happy. So we should be fighting suffering and misery everywhere, and we should be striving for happiness everywhere. I don't understand why that's something local. In fact, these people have been fighting for these rights and these values before the United States was even a country.
Yeah, and I've said it before, but I always get frustrated when people make this assumption that somehow it has to be in our backyard for it to be an issue. And I think that human rights are human rights regardless of the geographic location.
Let me give you an example and bring it back to the reform as well. Countries like Turkey and Iran, if you go back to Reza Shah's time and if you go back to Ataturk, people at that time would have assumed that Islam had gone the way that Christianity had went. If you look at the situation that was the culture and the values and the way people behaved in Ataturk's Turkey and in Reza Shah's Iran, you would have never thought that Islam would ever have such a comeback as it did in these countries. This is why I'm against reform and more for promoting critical thinking skills for people to always be able to determine bullshit from not bullshit, because religion is a disease. The reformed version of it is just a PR front for selling a poison that will at some point will come back. You know, if you don't promote critical thinking skills and provide people with the tools to always determine what's right and what's wrong and what's fact and what's fake news, when shit hits the fan, people will always go back and resort to not just Islam, but all of the form of delusions that have been designed to take advantage of people's desperation to give them hope for maybe fixing things. But at the end of the day, it enslaves them and creates armies of them, whether in battlefield or not in battlefield or in the battle of ideas. It basically enslaves them and always ends up making people do things that are not in their best interest. When it's pressured, it goes through a maybe pragmatic phase or quote-unquote reform phase where it tries to stay undercover and survive these modern times or recent values that are competing with it. But even when it's going through that phase, I don't think we should hold back. The religion is a dragon that when it's going through the sleeping phase, you should take advantage of it and slay the dragon. You shouldn't just feel like, okay, sleeping is not going to hurt us, because at some point it's going to wake up again. Even if people believe in delusions that are not harmful at the time, you should still try to provide them with critical thinking skills to go through those delusions that you think are not harmful at the time, and try to teach them that these are still delusions. These are still ideas without evidence, and you can't believe in ideas without evidence.
Have you seen a rise in skepticism throughout the Muslim world?
Yes, and this is the thing. A lot of people think like, oh, people are not going to abandon their religion people are not just going to pick up atheism. This is wishful thinking. But if you look at the ex-Muslim movement and the amount of skepticism that is currently among even people that are not atheists and haven't left Islam, there's much more hope. Here's an example. Ali Rizvi, right? I just had a discussion with him, and he was saying, like, what's wrong with letting people believe that, maybe the Quran is not the word of God? And like, okay, Ali, how many people do you know that are Muslim and think maybe the Quran is not the word of God? I personally haven't met a single one, but he has been talking to more people apparently than I have. And he said that he knows maybe 100. And he was saying that's a lot, right? I'm like, okay, Ali, how many people do you know that are ex-Muslim? And he said thousands. And then like, okay, add to that number, because a lot of people say like, oh, reform is a baby step. Atheism might be the goal, but reform is a baby step. I'm like, no, replacing a delusion with another delusion could never be a baby step. What's a baby step to atheism is doubt, because nobody is going to sacrifice their life or someone else's life or waste their life to something that they're only 99% sure about. Doubt is enough for us to basically make people take this life seriously, instead of wasting it for another life. So those are thousands of ex-Muslims that he knows. I'm pretty sure for every ex-Muslim, there must be at least 100 Muslim that is not 100% sure about Islam. So just introducing that seed of doubt, that's a huge advantage. People are asking me for baby steps and like, oh, reform is a baby step. And like, I'm telling them that's a bullshit baby step. Here's another baby step, even before doubt. I know many Muslims that read my book, Why There Is No God, or have talked to me on Skype or on Google Hangouts, and then they went from saying that atheism is absolutely ridiculous to the new position that I still think atheism is wrong, and I'm still 100% certain about Islam, but I see where the atheists are coming from. I see why somebody would be an atheist. And that's a win as well. That's a huge win. Because when you go from thinking atheism is absolutely ridiculous to all of a sudden thinking, okay, I see why somebody would be an atheist, you're never going to see these people as evil or as inferior or somebody that deserve, to be killed. Or
they're less likely to fight for the death penalty for apostates.
Yeah, or even if they've never fought for that, they would think, why would somebody that is wrong, but I see why they are wrong, why would they deserve eternal torture? Even in the next life. That would be a point of confusion for them that they have to struggle with. That struggle is enough. These achievements are always easier than just going for atheism. Even though atheism itself, we have achieved that. Just look at the ex-Muslim movement. The reform movement is a fringe movement. The Islamic reform movement has more atheist supporters than it has Muslim supporters, right? It's more backed by atheists than Muslims. But if you look at the ex-Muslim movement, it's growing. It's growing. And even in Saudi Arabia, there's like millions of atheists out there that are based on the most recent reports, right?
I think 5 million was the most recent.
That's incredible.
Or maybe not 5. It was 5%.
Yeah. I don't know what the numbers are.
Which is huge.
But
it's about 20% identify as non-religious, which is interesting. When you poll them anonymously, I think it was a Gallup poll, the most recent Gallup poll. And when polled anonymously, there's is amazingly a lot more non-Muslims than when you do it through official channels and their life is in danger.
Yeah, I mean, the first two people I talked to in Tehran about my atheism became skeptical about Islam within weeks. For people to just think that these are Islamic countries and they're way too far behind for us to have any hope for them and just dismiss them and think like maybe these people are too far behind to be atheists. Maybe they're too dumb to be atheists and just maybe giving them a delusion that they're not going to harm us. That's all we could wish for. That's so selfish and so condescending because, these countries were fighting for atheism way before the United States was even a country. You think you're good enough to leave your religion, but these people might be too stupid to leave their religion. How dare you? How dare you to deny them that option? And it's actually an easier argument to make.
But don't you think that there are some people who are past that point, who are so entrenched in an emotional ideology? I'm not saying that, an entire population. And I know that there are people who've come back from extreme radical positions. But I've also seen people who they are so utterly entrenched in an idea, it has become such a huge part of their identity that I'm not sure that I necessarily want to have a member of ISIS living next door to me as a neighbor. I don't think that I'm ever going to be able to change his mind. And I think that some people are past the point of no return. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and the argument is that these people have a higher chance to reform.
Well, no, maybe not to reform, but I was talking about...
No, yeah, but I'm comparing the chances of somebody going through a reform process than to a doubt process, right? And I'm saying to people that people think like reform is easier, and I'm telling them it's not, because the arguments for it are more ridiculous. And people are like, oh, why can't you have both? First of all, did I ever demand people to stop trying for reform? I'm just making the case for if you have limited resources and if you have limited time to grab people's attention, because resources and attentions are limited, I'm just appealing to people to try to go for doubt rather than reform. I'm telling people that they should stop reforming it. This is just an invitation to try. If you have the opportunity and if you have a Muslim as an audience, go for doubt. Here's the easy argument I make for atheism or just doubt. How do you know? How do you know? That's the easy question. Guess what the argument for reform was? Okay, this verse that says kill unbelievers, maybe it does mean something else. This verse that says hit your wife, maybe it means walk towards her. This verse that says that all non-Muslims are going to go to hell, maybe it means something else. And you have to go through that. First of all, none of these make sense. And anybody that reads the verse will be like, will never take you seriously because they can see what it actually says. And not most of them, but a lot of them read Arabic. But also the tafsir and the hadith confirms what they mean. So you're making ridiculous arguments. And at the same time, you have to do it for so many different verses and so many different hadiths. Every single one of them is a new argument. My argument is easy and makes sense. How do you know? And it's just listening. Okay, how do you know that? Well, where's your evidence for that? But what about this? That's an easier sell to make. It makes more sense. And that's why it has been more successful. I have talked to thousands of Muslims, and I can tell you that it works, and it is possible.
The interesting thing that I find, too, is that the Islam apologists who are making these arguments and saying, oh, this verse doesn't actually mean this, it means that instead, and you can hit your wife as long as it's, lightly, and it can't be, with a rod that's bigger than, this size. But it's not like we don't have the Quran in its original language. It's not like there aren't people living today, who speak classical Arabic, who can go and look at the literal translation and look at the actual words and what they say. And this is a book that, unlike the Bible, it doesn't claim to be, inspired by God. It claims to be the literal words of God delivered to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. And so I've always found it fascinating that someone like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is the head of ISIS, he, I believe, has a PhD in Islamic studies. And then you have someone like Reza Aslan who comes along, and I forget where he's from, but he's a very Western liberal Muslim. And he's like, oh, this doesn't actually mean that. But he would get laughed out of the room by, someone who actually speaks Arabic, who actually grew up in Saudi Arabia studying the Quran in its original language from birth.
Right. Well, the thing is that the audience for these people are not Muslims. Like these people that make these arguments, they're not convincing Muslims. What they're trying to do, and this is another problem I have. By the way, when I say the problem I have with reform movement, I would never put Reza Aslan in the same league as Majid Nawaz. Okay, Majid Nawaz, I love the guy. I support all the things that he's fighting for. The only thing that I'm suggesting to people is to suggest that he's reforming Muslims and not reforming Islam. That's the only thing that I disagree with him. But even if I disagree with him, I completely support all the things he does. But these reform movements, the audience most of the time is not Muslims to try, the audience is to the West, and that's dangerous because what it's doing is telling the West, like, hey, maybe don't fight Islam because maybe there's hope for Islam. And that's dangerous because the West, unfortunately, is one of the, many countries in the West are one of the few countries in the world that you could just say anything you want. And we need to use these free speech hubs to provide voice to the voiceless in places where they need it the most. And what they need the most is to call out Islam as bullshit. And I think that this reform movement is basically taking away those voices to be like, hey, maybe there's hope for Islam, which there is no hope. There's hope for Muslims. There's no hope for Islam, okay? Islam is never going to be a tool for progress. It's never going to be a tool for reform in the right direction. And another thing is that the problem, and again, with a lot of these reform advocates, not saying Majid, but the people that support the reform movement, is that it comes from like, oh, as long as they're not hurting us. The thing is, that's a very selfish attitude, because you're saying as long as they are trapped in their delusion, and as long as they're sacrificing this life for another, as long as they're not hurting me, as long as it's not a problem to me, that's okay. But guess what? Islam was a problem way before there were terrorist attacks in the West, okay? Women were suffering from Islam in Islamic countries. Gay people were suffering from Islam in these countries. Minorities were suffering in these countries way before there was a terrorist attack. And even right now, the victims of these terrorist attacks are very small compared to the victims of Islam in Islamic countries. So it's very selfish to sit back here and say, as long as it's not in my backyard.
It is in our backyard now, especially in Europe, not so much in the United States.
Yeah, but my point is that, and this is why people are now talking about Islam, because it's in their backyard. I'm just saying we should have cared about this even before it was in our backyards, because these are our fellow human beings that are suffering from Islam.
Oh, absolutely. What would you say to someone who is maybe alt-right, white nationalist, or whatever, that says they're going to come into our country, outbreed us, and before we know it, Islam is going to be ruling all of Europe? Do you see, obviously you think that the ideology of Islam is dangerous. Do you actually see that as a genuine threat?
I don't know how these people are predicting the future. What I'm saying is that what you're fearing already exists in Islamic countries. And for you to care about this only when it's threatening Westerners is selfish and often bigoted. And for you to think like, I don't care what the fuck they do in their country. And that's
what I was trying to ask more specifically is, do you think that Islam is going to continue to grow at its current rate?
I don't know. But what the numbers show is scary. The thing is that what I learned based on, studying statistics and stuff is that a trend is scary, but just because a trend exists in the past doesn't mean that trend will always continue. So if the current trends continue, that's pretty scary. But throughout history, trends at some point take dramatic turns. It could become a lot worse, or it could become a lot better. Throughout history, you see, Catholic ideology is growing. And just because you see the trend doesn't mean that it could all of a sudden take a nosedive out of nowhere, right?
Or plateau.
It could plateau, or all of a sudden, or it might have a huge increase. I'm just saying we shouldn't just leave these two trends. And a lot of these dramatic changes didn't happen just because, people point out to Christianity and just just give Islam the same amount of time and the same trend will happen. Like, are you serious? You're just going by a sample size of one religion to guess what's going to happen to Islam? And guess what? The things that happened to Christianity just didn't happen just because of time. The main ingredients was activism. We can't just rely on trends. We can change trends. And people like us, people like me, people like you, people who are listening, it depends on you guys to change trends. We can change trends. You don't have to just leave it up to time and history, Again, look at Iran and Turkey. If you're just following trends at that point, you thought Islam is done as a major influence in those countries. Nobody saw what happened in the Islamic Revolution that happened in Iran as a major comeback as Islam. Nobody could have predicted that, but it did. It's up to us to fight for these things. And this is why I'm saying we have to pick the right movement, because we can't afford to bet on the wrong horse on this one. We have to make sure that we're fighting the right fight, or else we're screwed, or else we might be on the losing side of history.
What I'm seeing consistently is, if you've ever been to the website gapminder.com, they take all the latest UN statistics and chart them out over time. And you'll see this in every single developing country in the world, including Muslim countries, where the total fertility rates are actually dropping. And so women are having less babies per woman. And if you look at how fast people are converting versus deconverting from Islam, they're leaving the religion in droves. And it's giving me hope, because the people who are fleeing for their lives to Europe, many of them are getting exposed to Enlightenment ideals for the very first time. And then guess who is going to be able to take that idea and send it back and take it back? One statistic that I've heard as far as literacy rates and whatnot within the Muslim world, they're very low for women, but also the number of books that are being translated into Arabic is about 330 per year, which is a number that is translated into Greek, which is a much smaller population size. But as literacy rates increase and as more people are moving to Europe and learning English and learning French and Spanish and German, there's more people who are going to be able to translate works like God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens. The God Delusion has been downloaded, I think, 10 million times in Arabic, which is insane. And that gives me a lot of hope.
It gives me a lot of hope too, but at the same time, I don't want to just rely on hope, because these things are happening not because they just happen. These things happen because somebody actually picked up the God delusion and went and translated it. These things are happening because of activists.
Exactly.
And another point is that the Muslim activists, they know what they're doing. They are pretty sophisticated, and the advantage they have is that they have a shit ton of money. So they are very well funded. They understand social media. They have much higher presence on social media than we do. And they have also learned that in the new age of social media, in countries where you can't censor people, the new way of censoring people is to introduce noise. We are in the age of information, but we're also in the age of misinformation. So the new way to sell your ideas is to basically produce so much fake news and so much noise out there that it's going to be hard for you to determine what's fact and what's not. There's so much misinformation out there. So what our activism should involve is not to just provide people with good information, but also to provide them with the tools to know what's good information and what's not good information, to understand what's a credible source of information and what's not a credible source of information. We can't just go out and just pump information out there that we think is true. We have to equip people with the tools to understand logical fallacies, to be skeptical about the information they get, to check their sources, to check the credibility of the sources, to know how to check the credibility of the sources. These are the skills that we have to provide to people, or else no matter how much information you put out there, it's going to be lost in the noise.
The distinction that I wanted to make was that I see people who are, demonizing all Muslims and saying, we don't want them coming into our country. And these are the people that we have to work with. These are the people who are able to translate these books into Arabic, but we have to go out of our way to empower them. And we have to be activists ourselves because, like you said, it's not going to reform itself on its own. People aren't going to leave Islam on their own. They have to stumble across some type of content, some alternative viewpoint.
Yeah, and the only way, the main way to get them to listen to you is to be nice to them. You can make the biggest border in the world, but the thing is that ideas don't care about walls or borders. Ideas go through walls and borders, right? The only way to fight ideas is with better ideas. And the only way to get people to consider your ideas is for you to be nice to them, or else they're not going to give you their attention.
Tell me a bit about your background.
I was born in Iran. I was born in a very liberal family that were Muslim, but the name Muslim was the only thing that made them Muslim, because they didn't pray, they didn't go to mosques, they didn't fast. So they didn't introduce Islamic teachings to me. But when I went to school, that's where I was introduced to the Islamic ideology, because it was a mandatory part of our teaching. And at some point, I took it very seriously and I became very religious. My parents actually found that very annoying, because I was trying to get them to start following Islam as well, because I was afraid that they're going to go to hell. Yeah, and me taking religion very seriously was eventually what actually turned me into an atheist.
Now, it was the fear of hell that caused you to almost take your own life.
Based on what they told us in school, the details might be different for other Muslims, right? But based on what I understood is that as a child, you're pure. There's no sin in Islam. This is very different from Christianity, because you're born with sin. There's the original sin in Christianity. I think, honestly, this makes more sense in Islam because, a child, how could you have sin if you don't understand right and wrong? In Islam, they have this thing called the age of reason. And before the age of reason, you're not responsible for your mistakes. So you have two angels that are recording your good deeds and your bad deeds, but they start recording once you get to the age of reason. So anything you do before that age is not counted as a sin, or the opposite of sin, which is savab. I don't know, a brownie point. So you get pluses and minuses, and they keep recording it. And for boys, that age is 15, and for girls, that age is 9. And it's interesting because they try to spin that around in school to us to try to suggest that, look, we're pro-women because we think women are wise by age 9, but boys are wise by age 15. But then later I understood that's actually more related to the age of marriage, because the age of reason was also the same as the age that you could get married. So that's the reason why it was 9 for girls and 15 for boys. But based on that, my understanding is that anything you do before age 15 is not a sin. And that's why even girls in Iran, you don't have to have the hijab before age 9, or you don't have to pray before age 9. But a lot of religious people make their children pray before age 9 or 15 just because they want to get them into the habit, because they think if you're not in the habit, it's really hard to get into the habit by age 15. But even if you miss it, it doesn't count as sin before age 9 or 15. So that means if you die before age 15 as a boy, you're going to go to heaven because you haven't sinned at all. I thought, well, suicide is a sin in Islam, but there's no sin if you do it before age 15. So I thought to myself, why wouldn't I just kill myself before age 15 to make sure I go to heaven? Because I was really afraid of going to hell. In fact, one time I light up a match and I blew it out and then put it on my skin just to see how much it hurts. And it was really painful because I was a spoiled brat. But then I imagined that all over my skin for thousands of years, because our teachers told us that smallest amount of sin will get you years in hell. There are some things that will get you eternity in hell, and some things that will get you thousands of years in hell, and then you go to heaven once you paid for your sins, right? Being a non-Muslim will get you eternity in hell. But being a Muslim and then stealing will get you thousands of years in hell, and then you go to heaven. You just pay for it and you go to heaven. Well, how could I take thousands of years in hell when I can't even take the small amount of pain for a few seconds? I actually went and talked to my religion teachers in school, and I asked, why wouldn't I just kill myself and die as a child to make sure I go to heaven? And they said, well, if you die as a child, you haven't earned heaven, so you go into the lowest part of heaven. But if you earn heaven by being a good Muslim, you go into a higher part of heaven. Heaven has layers, and the highest part is for martyrs, and that's where Muhammad is. But I thought to myself, honestly, I really don't care which part of heaven I go to. I just don't want to burn. Even if it's completely neutral, even if it's just okay, you know, as long as I don't burn for years, that's good enough for me. So once I checked that, I decided to make sure I kill myself before I reached age 15. So I jumped out of the window in my school, broke my left hand, both my legs, I fractured my back. I was in a wheelchair and in my bed for around 7 months. I missed 1 year of school. Only reason why I didn't try it again was that I saw how it affected my parents. This is why I kind of get that, you know, religion, even if it doesn't turn you into a jihadist, could make you do crazy stuff if you take it seriously. If you accept the premises of what I believed in, my logic was pretty sound. I mean, even to this day, I think that would be the logical. At that time, I couldn't understand why nobody else is doing this. Why people are leaving it up to chance. You might, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might end up being I might have ended up being an atheist, right? If I saw myself today, back then, I would have tried 100 other times to kill myself because I would be terrified of who I am today. Like, I would see this guy, I'm like, this guy is going to go to hell forever. I have to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So I'm like, why would people leave it up to chance? Why would you risk? Why would you gamble the most important thing, the most important threat in your life, instead of just guaranteeing heaven? People didn't seem to care about heaven. People believe in heaven and hell, but they seem to not be very concerned about it. Everybody was concerned about their careers, about getting their grades in school, about what to wear in the next party, but nobody seemed to care about heaven and hell. I say, like, how could people not be concerned about this? This should be your number one priority. We're talking about eternity, people. But the fact that I think my position was logical makes me understand that, you know, these fundamentalists and even the jihadists are actually people that are taking the premises of Islam and putting two and two together and trying to come up with a logical conclusion based on the false premises. If you have false premises, even if your logic is solid after the false premises, you're going to come into bad conclusions. So we have to get rid of those false premises instead of trying to use false premises and try to direct people into the conclusions that we find acceptable. You can't do that. If you have false premises, you don't have much control over the conclusions people are going to lead to. If people are nice and people are kind, it has nothing to do with those premises. It's because they are nice and they are kind. So this is another problem I have with the reform movement, because they are trying to play with those premises and say the niceness of these people has nothing to do with those premises, because those premises, if anybody takes it seriously, is going to get you into some really bad conclusions.
What steps would you advise that people take if they are maybe sitting somewhere here in the US or in Canada and they want to help to engage in this battle of ideas?
If you have a platform, like you invite ex-Muslims to your platform. Don't be like, oh, I want to fight Christianity because I understand it. If you don't understand it, just bring ex-Muslims on your platform and they understand it. Just give them an audience. If you have a blog, if you have a podcast, if you have a YouTube channel, just normalize that discussion. Make it not a taboo. Don't be worried about being called bigot. Just normalize bringing up these discussions. And I understand that it's hard, and I understand that you want to avoid people seeing you racist, but it's racist not to bring up these discussions because you are basically accepting some values for people here that you're not accepting for other people, and that's the racist thing to do. And I understand that you might be branded as a bigot, but we have to normalize these things. We have to normalize these discussions. So bring it up and question it.
I've been insulted and called names before. At worst, it hurts my feelings, and then we move on.
Me and Ali, we have had this same experience a couple of times. People come after the event and say, like, you know what? I like what you're saying, and I want you to keep saying it. I just don't want to say it because I'm white, and I will be perceived as a bigot if I say it. Even some people told Ali that I like sharing your content because you guys are born from there and you have the background, but I don't like sharing Sam's because he's white and it seems like I'm being racist if I share his content. But like, okay, but that's racist by itself. You're telling me that you need to have the right skin color to be able to say something. That is racist, right? Because the truth is the truth. And you need to advocate for the truth. You don't need to be the right color to say the truth. And be like, oh, well, I don't understand Islam. I understand Christianity. You have the experience. You were born in Iran. Okay, you don't have to live as a Muslim for 20 years to understand that claims without evidence should not be believed in. That's a very simple thing. Islam is a claim. There's no evidence. Call it out. Call it out as something without evidence. There's no backing. This is a baseless claim. You don't have to be an ex-Muslim to demand evidence for claims.
Well, it's like I was never a Scientologist, but I can look at that religion and say point blank it's bullshit just from a, surface level inspection of it.
Yeah, I'm not an ex-Christian, and I call bullshit on Christianity all the time. So you
racist. Well, I spent about 15 years of my life in the Muslim world, and even still, people say, who are you to talk about it? But I like giving platforms to people like you, or to I'll have Ali on my show if he ever hears this.
You should.
And I just made a video where I was talking about Islam, but I didn't even talk through the entire video. I just brought on clips of women living in the Muslim world and Islamic clerics. And like, I think I had one from Green Lane Mosque in Birmingham, in the UK. And I'm just showing what's out there. I'm just showing what's going on. And people still think, this isn't the real Islam, this isn't.
Have these people read the Quran?
I have.
That's good. By the way, thank you so much. Thank you so much for normalizing this. Thank you so much for providing a platform to me and other ex-Muslims. I really appreciate that. And for people that do want to back the ex-Muslim movement instead of the reform movement, I tell you that doesn't mean that you shouldn't back reformists, because the reformists, most of them are fighting for the same fights, same values that we're fighting. So I advocate for uniting with them when it comes to fighting gay rights. Fighting homophobia. I'm for gay rights, fighting sexism, fighting for freedom of speech. I unite with them all day long. But when it comes to saying reform Islam, that's the only place where I draw the line. And I say, no, I'm advocating for people to leave Islam instead of reforming Islam. And if you want to do that, there's many great organizations out there. There's ex-Muslims of North America. There's Council of Ex-Muslims of Great Britain. There's ex-Muslims of Sweden, ex-Muslims of Norway, ex-Muslims of, Iraq. We have our podcast, which is the major ex-Muslim podcast out there with 4 ex-Muslim hosts, which is the secular jihadists from the Middle East. With me, Ali Rizvi, Yasemin Mohammed, and Faisal. Everybody knows Faisal, right? These are 4 ex-Muslims, and we're always talking about Islam. We usually disagree, so that's a great thing because you get to see different perspective from ex-Muslims. We're not just sending one message. We're basically showing the different views that we have. And
because you guys have very different backgrounds and experiences in Islam as well.
Yes. I come from Iran. Ali came from Pakistan and he lived in Saudi Arabia. Faisal lived in Iraq. Yasmin, she has an amazing experience. She was born and raised in Canada, but she went through the most extreme version, the most purest version of Islam. Even though she was born in Canada, she was actually married to the right-hand man of bin Laden, to an Al-Qaeda member. So her story and her experience is very amazing. But this also shows her story and many other people's story that were born in UK or United States or Canada, makes the point that this is not about immigration and building walls. This is a battle of ideas, right? It doesn't matter where you're born. Ideas,
they go through borders.
They go through borders. But the best defense is an offense, right? If you want to fight these ideas, don't just stay at home and be like, not in my backyard. No, we go to their countries and we try to promote atheism. And don't apologize for promoting atheism. People are like, why are you promoting atheism? You're just as bad as them. And why can't you let people believe what they believe? And I tell them my problem with religion is not that they're advocating their ideas. Muslims should be able to advocate Islam. Christians should be able to advocate Christianity. And atheists should be able to advocate atheism. That's not the problem that I have with Islam and Christianity. We all put our ideas out there and the best ideas win. The accusation of why can't you let people believe what they want? How can anybody ever force anybody to leave their ideology? This is an invitation. This has nothing to do with letting or not letting. Of course, they can believe in whatever they want, but who are you to deny them an alternative? This is just an invitation to consider an alternative. We're not going to them. We're doing this on our own platform. They're coming to us if they're curious enough. We're not forcing our content on them. And when I wrote my book, Why There Is No God, I didn't ever force anybody to read it. People leave reviews like, why can't you let people believe in God? Here's an easy solution for whoever doesn't like my book. Don't read it. There you go. That's an easy thing to do. We never went to people and tell them that they have to leave their religion. They have to become atheists. It's just an invitation, and we should not deny them that invitation. And I appreciate when a Muslim comes to me and tries to invite me to Islam, if the intention is to save me from hell, I appreciate that because it's coming from a position of kindness. I don't deny them the opportunity to try to convert me to Islam. I don't deny a Christian the opportunity to try to convert me to Christianity. All I'm asking for is also to provide equal opportunity for us to promote our views and promote our alternative to Islam and Christianity and other ideologies. Just let the best ideas win. And I do believe that if you provide equal opportunities to all ideas and you also give people the skills to determine bullshit from fact, I do think at that point the best ideas will win.
For people listening who don't have their own platform, how would you recommend that they become active in this battle?
Share our content. Go on YouTube and share it and like it, share it with your friends, share it on your Facebook page. Go to the secular jihadists from the Middle East and leave us a review. If you read my book, Why There Is No God, or Ali's book, The Atheist Muslim, go read his book and, leave a review for his book, leave a review for my book. If you think it's valuable, share it with the people that you think could benefit from it. Talk about these things in whatever social network that you have.
And if you speak Arabic and you're able to translate God is not great, oh my God.
Yeah. Or if you, by the way, anybody listening to this and they speak Persian or Arabic or Indonesian or Turkish, or if you're from Bangladesh or in any of these countries or Spanish, if you come and translate my book, Why There Is No God, I will provide the translation of my book for free on our website to anybody that comes to atheistrepublic.com, and I'll make sure that it's easily available. So anybody listening that wants to promote atheism or skepticism, my book, Why There Is No God, come reach out to me. I'll give you the PDF, especially if you have experience in translations. Come reach out to me. I will give you the PDF. And once I have the translation, I'll make that freely available to everybody.
Fantastic. Was there anything that you wanted to touch on or talk about that we haven't hit in this interview?
If you disagree with anything I said, or if you have anything to add, come find me on Twitter. Our main account is Atheist Republic, which is right now the largest platform for atheism on social media in the world. But because the notifications on that is crazy. So if you want to reach to me and if you want to debate or something, come on Twitter at Armin Navabi. If you have something valuable to discuss, I would be interested in doing that with you on discussions on YouTube Live on the Atheist Republic channel. So yeah, come reach out to me and we can have discussions.
Well, Armin, hey, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Guys, seriously, go check out Armin's podcast, The Secular Jihadists of the Middle East. It is one of my current favorite podcasts out there, and the hosts are a blast. They're hilarious, and they have some incredibly insightful ideas. It's definitely worth a listen. If you believe in my cause and you want to help support my work promoting science, curiosity, and free thought, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/holykoolaid. Even just $1 helps me to continue making these videos. If you're one of my supporters on Patreon, thank you. You guys are amazing. I can't make these videos without your support and your help, and it means so much to me. If you're new to this channel, hit the subscribe button. I really hope you like the rest of my content. Feel free to like and share. You guys rock so much, and together, we're making a difference.